Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Ian Garry you get from the Cash and Carry, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC 303. What remains should have been the subtitle of this card, or what we could get. Obviously, Conor McGregor pulled out of the fight with Michael Chandler. They charged Conor McGregor last fight ever ticket prices, and they probably paid less than Conor McGregor would earn for his purse for every purse on the card. So while this should have been a big embarrassment for the UFC, it might work out as like their best profit margin on an event ever. They got to be at home going, I wish we could bait and switch Conor deliberately. But the card was saved almost entirely due to the UFC's sledgehammer for hire, Alex Pereira. Let him be a sledgehammer. He'll be anything you need. If that song weren't already about Peter Gabriel's penis, it would be a fantastic walkout for Alex Pereira. I hope he got paid a fortune for this. This is his third time stepping in at short notice to save the UFC's arse. Every time he delivers a spectacular, well, most times he delivers a spectacular knockout. He is the UFC's only active star. You could pretend John Jones is active, but he isn't. Dude should be earning a fortune. Now, of course, every Alex Pereira fantastic knockout has to have a fantastic knockout victim. That's the sad part. There is the rule of alchemy demands equal exchange, and for Alex Pereira to score great knockouts, he has to take years off people's lives. And this time, as it was 2 times ago, it was Jiri Prochazka. Now, I always feel like with rematches, certainly title rematches, people should not be tricked into taking short notice fights. It is rushing. You know, if you're getting a second shot at someone when you lost the first, you got to dial it all in. You got to fix your game plan up. You got to come in with a smarter idea of what you're doing. There's a lot to be done, and you're working on really slim margins for error. And it's like this one, Volkanovski versus Islam Makhachev 2. It's like you really wanted the rematch, but then you jumped in and did it on a couple of weeks' notice. That was silly, because now you're not going to get a third one, basically, ever. Unless the division's completely frozen and you beat all the contenders, it's very hard to justify or earn a third match when you lost the first 2. However, if Jiri Prochazka's game plan was much different for this one, it was because he stopped doing the things that even slightly worked in the first fight. He just came out and, you know, I heard people say like, oh, it was 2 weeks notice, there's not a lot of time for game planning. Well, he already knew that he'd lost to Pereira. He already knew that he was going to get another shot at Pereira at some point. And he already knew that Pereira had really hurt him with low kicks, which is something that almost anyone can do. And Alex Rakic proved that in the next fight that Jiri had. What did he throw, like 30 kicks and 25 of them landed? And Jiri didn't check one. So a couple of them missed is what that means. And that was in like less than 2 rounds. He threw 30 low kicks and landed almost all of them. Unfortunately, Jiri seems to be surrounded by clowns. I don't know what his team is. I don't know if it's just blokes who he trains with in the forest. But there are good teams in Europe. You don't even have to travel to America and like join ATT or AKA. You could go to All Stars in Sweden. You could go to Renegade in Birmingham, which is in England. Sorry, I said the country for one and the city for the other. But there are lots of places where you could go. And even if your plan was like to mix in the wrestling, there are good wrestling camps in Europe. Those 2 I just mentioned are pretty good for wrestling. And it should have been, because like this was always the task that he had and Jamal Hill had, and anyone who is a striker who meets Alex Pereira, it's you are probably not the slicker striker, so you need to bring out a better rounded game and play it all off each other. There's nothing to say someone can't beat Alex Pereira on the feet, but mixing it all together and applying more of a wrestling threat effectively will certainly help you with that. But Jiri was in the woods doing nonsense, basically. He was just screaming at trees and convinced himself that shamanic magic was how Alex Pereira beat him and not hundreds of low kicks that went unchecked. Came out for this fight southpaw, and that seemed to be part of his game plan to stop getting low kicked. And against a lot of fighters, that works embarrassingly well. Someone like Pedro Munoz, or one of those fighters who is like completely built around the calf kick. You switch stances on them and they'll go, oh my God, I can't calf kick with my other leg. Alex Pereira is good enough that he actually can calf kick with his left leg. You have to do a step up. It's not as sneaky, but he's pretty good at it. And he immediately got to work doing it against Jiri. So Jiri switched back to orthodox and started taking the right low kick to the calf and did not look happy. Within about 2 kicks, he was moving a bit gingerly. The other part of his plan to deal with the low kicks was to try and jump in with a counter, which he did on the third or fourth that Alex threw, and he got hit by the kick and didn't land the counter. And after that, it was like, well, was that the plan, mate? Is that all you've got to deal with the low kicks? And as it turned out, it was. He did move Alex to the fence and begin wrestling, but again, should have been working at a top camp. He got a body lock on Alex, which is really good position. And then he tried one trip stepping over the leg, failed, and then he gave it up. He lost the body lock. And Alex Pereira stepped out to the side, snapped his head into the fence, and because he's got that stupid dong on his head, if you slide your hand over the back of his head to snap him down, you don't have to grab his hair. Your hand will hit his hair and use it as a lever to pull him. So if you watch when Alex escapes, he snaps his hand over Jiri's head as a collar tie, and Jiri's head flips around because he's got a fucking handle on the back of it. But that's the thing about cage offense. Alex Pereira is pretty good at holding himself up. We said this last time. But the point of cage offense is that once you get your hands locked in a body lock with double underhooks, you can recycle. You can attempt to trip or step inside to the middle and attempt to throw. And if it fails, you keep them along the fence and you try again. The hard part of fence work, we always say this, it's easy to get up along the fence from the bottom. The hard part is breaking away. And Jiri made that really easy for Alex. Out in the open, Jiri is trying to throw long punches. This is the thing, like, he's doing the weird karate stance. I believe he started out in Muay Thai and became fascinated with, like, Bushido and karate stuff. But he doesn't really have, like, if you watch someone like Kyoji Horiguchi or Lyoto Machida, one of those people who've applied traditional karate in a fighting context at a high level, tends to be setting traps and waiting for the opponent to come towards you and then occasionally blitzing in. Jiri does lumbering in behind his hands, relying on his 80-inch reach, stepping in too far and getting cracked with counters against even the worst opponents he fights. And like if you do want to operate like a karate game plan against Alex Pereira, bring him forward onto you and try and step to meet him as he steps forward. But Jiri wasn't trying any of that. He was trying to go to Alex. And, you know, pumping out a double jab with your right hand on your titty like you're going to join the Masons. Not the best form, if we're honest. I'm not here to tell you that keeping your non-punching hand up is going to save you 100% of the time. It's not safe at all. But there's like a hierarchy of things to do to stop yourself getting hit. Top of that hierarchy is like, be too far away to hit, or be clinched up with the guy. But those don't really work to our ends of landing punches on the opponent. You need to be close enough to be hit to do some hitting. So having your non-punching hand up gives you some level of defense from the opponent. Good fighters are pretty good at sneaking their punches around the standard guard position. If you watch... I was talking about Wang Chinoy the other day. He did a cool session with Silva on her Patreon and on YouTube. Muay Thai legend, Wang Chinoy, one of the greats. Probably the greatest, like, boxer-puncher in Muay Thai history. He had this left hook he was explaining to Silva, and he tries to get it behind the forearm of the opponent and onto the neck. And if you watched Fedor versus Tim Sylvia, Fedor versus Ulo Zinho, that combination where he slaps down the lead hand and jumps in with the left hook always sneaks behind the opponent's right arm and hits him in the neck. Sugar Ray Robinson used to talk about, like, yes, it's good to hit people in the jaw, but it's very hard to hit good fighters in the jaw because they use their shoulders and their gloves to hide their jaw. What they don't hide very well is their temples and their eyes. So Sugar Ray Robinson was always aiming for the temples and the eyes because the temples have a similar sort of discombobulating effect if you hit them. And the eyes, of course, if you jab them, punch them, they close and it makes the opponent easier to hit because they can't see stuff coming. And Pereira has been working in kickboxing for a long time, which is a sport in which people are very good at just hiding behind the gloves. It makes it very hard for a lot of guys to cross over to MMA because you don't have the big gloves and you can't just cover up. A lot of kickboxing is pretty bad for this. And I love Japanese kickboxing, and that's especially bad for it. Just cover up. Dutch kickboxing also, cover up, take the blows, throw back your own combination with a low kick on the end, and be like, I did defense. Then you got people like Giorgio Petrosian who can actually do defense, and it's levels above everyone else in kickboxing. But Alex Pereira has been working on landing the left hook against good kickboxers for a long time. If you go back and read, I don't know if it's still there, when I was working at Fightland back in 2016, maybe 2015, 2014, I don't remember when this was. But there was an event called Glory Last Man Standing. It was Glory's first attempt at a pay-per-view. And the lineup was spectacular. It was this middleweight tournament with Artem Levin, Simon Marcus, Philip Verlinden, Joe Schilling when he was good. And in the first round, Artem Levin, who was the favourite to win the tournament, met a young Alex Pereira. And I wrote an article about the entrance to this tournament, trying to hype it up. And I remember saying that Alex Pereira doesn't really have a lot of kickboxing skill at the moment, but he's come from boxing and he's got a terrific left hook, which is pretty rare to have a left hook like that in kickboxing. And I was like, oh, if he could build some stuff around that. And then years later, obviously, he became an incredible kickboxer just by adding little bits and keeping that left hook and adapting it for kickboxing. Now, sadly, the Glory Last Man Standing event, he went out in the first round to Artem Levin, who was the favourite, and did win the tournament, I believe. And the event managed to get like 3,000 buys. So it wasn't terrifically successful, but it was very good. But if you watch Pereira's kickboxing fights, particularly the later ones when he's really dialed it in and he knows what he's doing in kickboxing, he fights with his hands in front of his shoulders and quite wide to try and get people to throw through the middle. And then he's really good at timing the left hook across the top of the opponent's right hand when their shoulder should be protecting their chin. So he's trying to get he's trying to snipe the temple, and he was really good at it. So what I'm saying is, if he's good at that, and then you come out running across the cage with the jab out and your right hand down by your ball sack, he's probably going to chin you quite easily. And that's how he dropped Jiri to end the first round, and it basically ended the fight. Came out for the second round. Same hold as there. Jiri's right hand is down by his chest, but he's not at an appropriate distance to do that. Pereira steps up into a very quick high kick. Doesn't, I said this on the Boycast, doesn't do a lot of kicking above the waist typically. Didn't used to kick that much generally in kickboxing. Found the calf kick in MMA and loves it, but used to kick basically to just get people coming back at him. He used to throw a right high kick. Well, read my article, Advanced Striking 2.0 Alex Pereira, which is available, I believe, for free on thefightprimer.com, and I'll link in the description on YouTube. But he used to use a right low kick to get people coming back because everyone goes, oh, I've got to get one back off the low kick. And he would put his foot down behind him and left hook immediately. And that's how he'd set up the counter left hook. All his best left hooks are done going backwards. The ones he's been landing in MMA have been forward-moving left hooks, which aren't nearly as hard, and he's still knocking people out. But then people stopped responding to the low kick, so he started throwing the right high kick. And the great thing about the high kick is even if people are like, I won't run in on him, if you kick their arm into their head, they go, oh, you bastard, and try and get one back. And then he'd left hook him again as his foot came down. But yeah, typically not huge on the kicks, liked the double jumping knee in kickboxing. But yeah, it's really sharp with his kicking form and doesn't throw a ton of hip behind it. He's a big guy and he can land quite hard just with the weight of the limb. So he's pretty good at holding things back. Like the calf kicks, he holds his shoulders back so that you don't see it. And then he just kicks with his leg. And he kicks hard, like if he misses, he goes through. But it's not perfect kicking form for power. It's perfect kicking form for sneaking that kick in, which is always the balance in every combat sport. What's ideal for hitting the bag and for generating huge amounts of force and winning the punch machine at the UFC Institute of Dick Riders or whatever it's called isn't the same as what actually lands on people. You normally have to shave a bit off the power to do things to sneak it in. Unless you're fighting an absolute corpse or unless your opponent runs at you with their hands down. So Jiri blew this, absolutely blew it. That was his big chance. He's not getting a third fight with Alex Pereira, even if he clears out the division, is he? I mean, sometimes I do wish this was an anime, and I wish that wanting it more or screaming and then attacking, showing passion, won fights, but it doesn't. As Corey Sanhagen very famously said to Chito Vera, yeah, everyone wants it as much as you, bro. You have to do something different. But Jiri seems to be the kind of guy who falls for all the stuff that they used about Bushido to get young men to jump into planes with half a tank of fuel, and none of the stuff that's like, imagine Musashi being like, oh yeah, you got to trick him however you can. You can get him looking the other way and stab him in the back. That's perfect. The whole thing about Musashi is that he was like a massively practical guy to the point that people thought he was, ungentlemanly or unbushido-y. And people read the Book of Five Rings and they're like, yes, my ki is too strong for the opponent. Anyway, hope Alex made a fortune. I just realized this is the card where the two of the people who MMA fans really obsess about their love lives are on. You got Alex Pereira, and there was all that stuff about like his girlfriend and they broke up, and Pollyanna Via, what's her name? The lass whose whole personality is Naruto. And then you got Ian Garry. And, if you do find yourself caring about, like, fighters' personal lives, I mean, you got to treat it like the other survivors have just noticed that you've been hiding a bite. You got to get yourself a cinder block, and you got to floor press it above your head and just let go. It's over for you at that point. But that was the other fight on this card people cared about, or I cared about. MVP versus Ian Garry. How mad is everyone that Ian Garry used mixed martial arts in a mixed martial arts fight? I thought on the feet he actually had the right idea. He was trying to jab with MVP, sort of the old... it's what a few of Eddie Futch's fighters were able to do against Muhammad Ali, because Muhammad Ali was so quick and in the habit of being able to get in and get out with his jab with great ease. His right hand was almost never up as a guard. And when you're jabbing, sometimes you want it up to the side. If you're fighting someone with a great Alex Pereira type left hook, you don't run in with your right hand down by your chest because then you get jiried. If you're fighting someone who's going to jab back at you, you normally bring that right hand towards the center line and you start palming their jab at the same time as you jab. So a great example of this would be Tommy Loughran, who again I wrote a big article about. I think that's on the Patreon. But you can go and watch a Tommy Loughran fight. All he had was the jab, and he always had his right hand out in front of him, patting the opponent's left hand. But Ali never had his right hand up because he was so used to being too fast and getting away with it. So Eddie Futch trained Ken Norton to jab with Ali, and Ken Norton was able to throw Ali off and break his jaw with a left hook after stumbling him with a jab, and give him a horrible time through 3 fights. Or was it 2 fights? But yeah. And Ken Norton was a good athlete, but he wasn't like the most skilled boxer in the world. He just had a really good game plan drilled into him by Eddie Futch. And it exploited a weakness in Ali that Ali had to then go and work on. But if you've got a guy who likes to burst in with big, long, straight attacks, trying to time it with the jab can work. Those were the ones where Garry got hit, to be honest. Those were the ones that didn't work out that great. The other things he was trying to time were a low kick, like below the knee, as MVP stepped in, which is what Douglas Lima famously did to take out MVP's legs, and then hit him with an uppercut that hit him right on the point of the chin. And it's like, I remember at the time people getting very mad at me for saying this, but I said, man, that was a very lucky punch in that it landed just about perfectly because MVP bounced up with his head sideways, like parallel to the floor, and got caught right on the point of the chin. I mean, I know that Douglas Lima was trying to hit him, but it was just, you couldn't plan a crazy connection like that. And then, of course, they had a rematch, and Douglas Lima didn't do nearly anything as effective because Douglas Lima is Bellator Tyron Woodley. He's given up throwing strikes. But that didn't work tremendously either. The other one that he was looking for, he occasionally tried a right front kick to the body, which in some circumstances can be smarter because it's got less of a tell than it depends how you're standing. But, the lead leg push kick is the traditional one from kickboxing and Muay Thai. But if you're standing in a wider stance with more weight on your front leg, the right foot can get there quicker a lot of the time. But every time he lifted his knee to do it, MVP jumped in and hit him with a counter, which was quite impressive. But the one that did work was using all those things, trying to time him. And even if that doesn't work, that sets up the level change. And like 3 times in this fight, MVP jumped in, Garry was on his hips and either like running around his back, pushing to a clinch, and it all started getting much worse for MVP, just off 3 well-timed slips or level changes. And I don't think you can underrate trying to strike with him, as in like trying to intercept him with counters, because that got him into, he's going to try and time me, I've got to get in quick. And then he completely forgot about Ian Garry ducking on his hips. Garry got on the back in the first round, and man, that was close. I haven't looked at it again to see how he fucked it up, but he was under the chin, and that should be, against almost anyone, like dead to rights. The thing about MVP is that I've been having a good laugh at him on Twitter because he did spend most of his career fighting bin men, and it's the thing that I hate most about fighting, padding your record up at the expense of other people's health. Now I know they all sign a contract and they're supposed to be there, but it's just like, it's so cheap, and it also works on the stupidest people in the world. They go like, MVP could beat George St. Pierre, don't you know? Chris Pratt going on some show going, there was this great champion and he's doing a dance, and it turned out it was MVP he was talking about against like some homeless dude. I've said it a lot of times, but MVP had like 12 fights in Bellator and had fought the champion when they gave him Richard Keeley, who was either a full-time librarian or a full-time teacher and had a 2-1 record. But all of that is to say that I have always at every stage said that MVP is an extremely talented fighter. I'd just like to see him fight other talented fighters. And when he fought Lima that first time, the thing that was crazy was that Lima took him down in the first round, and Lima's supposed to be a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and one of the best in the world in his division, as an MMA fighter at the time. And MVP just held his wrists. And that's supposed to be like, well, you turn over elbows and start smashing them up. But MVP has this incredible grip strength and big hands and just held onto his wrists, and Lima couldn't do anything about it for a whole round. And so when I was watching him grab Ian Garry's wrists when Ian Garry had his back, I was like, yeah, well, once he's got your hands, you're probably going to have a hard time because he's very strong. But it is crazy to get like under the chin and not finish it. He was trying to like get the other hand behind the head, and MVP was fighting the other hand. But like at that point, just go to the gable grip, the old Dan Severn style, rear naked. But, didn't happen. I think it was the second round where Ian Garry pushes him to the fence, again off like a timed level change in exchange, gets the hips, gets the clinch, pushes MVP to the fence, and then he dropped on a leg, which is sometimes, you typically see it in like a Claudio Poles versus Dan Hooker. I have nothing on the feet and I'm giving up sort of performance, but it worked quite well here. Frank Mir did it to Junior Dos Santos too, but didn't really get it. But pulling onto a leg with the single leg X can be pretty effective, because all you need is to, you get the leg, but you don't have to complete a single, as in a single leg takedown. You do throw yourself underneath the guy, which is a bit risky, but he managed to, he threatened to reap MVP's knee to the inside. MVP pulled his, corrected, pushed his knee out, and then Garry went with it and toppled him by turning his knee outwards. He ended up in the saddle and started trying to inside heel hook. And the thing that I would have loved to see him do there, I think he was losing the knee line anyway, but I've mentioned Taylor Perman on the podcast a couple of times. He just won the ADCC trials for Europe, came out of nowhere, British dude, leg locked a bunch of dudes, kind of like Owen O'Flanagan last time. But he does this, and I think he picked it up from Gordon Ryan doing it at ADCC 2022. They get the inside, the saddle, which is where you attack the inside heel hook, very bad position, used to be dead to rights. Everyone's very good at turning away and doing the running man escape now and getting their knee free. What Taylor Perman and Gordon Ryan have been doing is passing the foot across to the other side and doing an outside heel hook, and I think that might have given him a chance there against MVP. But leg attacks in MMA generally, I wouldn't advise pursuing them. I'd advise using them from the bottom to get up or to create scrambles, as we talked about dozens of times before with like Pantoja and Oliveira. They've got 80 fights between them. They use leg attacks in every fight effectively to move people and to get them off the top of them, but they've got one leg lock between them submission on their record. Finishing leg attacks in MMA, very tricky. And in the third round, MVP landed a couple of good strikes, and then I believe Garry ended up on his back again. Oh, the first round was he was taken down off a kick, which was very interesting, because that was when Garry was trying to jab in and meet him. And MVP threw up a left high kick, and it ended up on top of Garry's shoulder. And Garry's right hand was low. He could have got domed by that kick. But it came off trying to jab with MVP. It was just a happy coincidence of that, or a happy side effect of that. I did like MVP's little, he did the Wonder Boy thing where you fake to enter, take a little bounce off to your right, and then enter again. The one he did on Masvidal, when he saw Masvidal was picking up his lead leg to teep. He faked to enter, Masvidal's leg came off the floor, he bounced right and he bounced in again, and he came in on an angle, zigzagged him, and MVP did one of those in this fight, which was quite cool. So Garry won, and he now needs to issue an apology for mixing the martial arts. He needs to say sorry for party rocking everyone. He moves forward. MVP probably ends up in a matchup that's a little bit more... someone who's more inclined to fight in a stupid way that will let him show off his striking. Co-main was Diego Lopez versus Dan Ige. Last minute rush together. Diego Lopez was ready to weigh in at 145. Brian Ortega announces he's not going to make it. Can they do 155? Then Brian Ortega drops out because he's ill. They get Dan Ige in at the last moment. Dan Ige says, yes, I'm absolutely ready, but can we do 165? So Diego Lopez ready to weigh in at 145, weighs in at I don't know what he weighed in at, but he weighs in under 165. That was the important point. And these two gave a good account of themselves in a last-minute fight against a random opponent they hadn't trained for. I think the first two rounds, Dan Ige did the thing that Dan Ige normally does that isn't good, which is circle the cage with his hands high, switching stances, and then running in on a straight line. And he'd do like a right hand lead and then try and weave, and Diego Lopez would grab his head with both hands and knee him. And after 2 rounds of that, Dan Ige comes out in the third and presses Diego Lopez towards the fence. And suddenly, that coming in on a straight line, because he can get closer to Lopez, because he can get closer without Lopez readjusting the distance, he's suddenly in range to actually be dangerous on that first step and not like fall short running forward and then weave into a double collar tie or come up and get hit. So his third round was really good. There was a cool, he did a takedown attempt and Diego Lopez did a guillotine, tilted him, came up on the dart. Great move. Patchy Mix did that to Magomedov. Works a treat because you're probably not rolling someone all the way over with your guillotine if they're trying to take you down. What you can do is tilt them to their side so that they jump back up. And as they jump back up, they're not holding you down, which is when you can come up to your knees, start looking for darces. What does it mean? Nobody knows. At least Diego Lopez won and can continue with his meteoric rise, as Mike Goldberg used to say. Would have been sad if he lost to a last minute, double last minute opponent at a random weight and somehow lost standing in the division as a result of it. Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Smith was exactly as bad as you'd imagine, and I'm not going to say anything more about it. Macy Chasson versus Mayra Bueno Silva was actually a banger. Mayra Bueno Silva does always actually get in people's faces and she uses pressure quite well. I really like that she uses a right front kick to the body, as we were talking about earlier, but she uses it to push people back towards the cage and then steps through in southpaw. So she did it she did it a couple of different ways in this fight. She'd push Macy back towards the cage with the teep with her right leg and step in. And then if Macy went to Mayra's left, Mayra would throw a left high kick with what is now her rear leg because she's standing southpaw. And if Macy went the other way, she'd wheel kick. Works really well. I really like push kicking people to the fence. Oral Bai. Is he Mongolian? Maybe Kazakh? But he's a wrestler and he fought Elvis Brenner in his last one. And he's all wrestling, but he used his teeps to push the opponent to push Brenner towards the fence and then entered on his takedown attempts. But these two, once they got close, they clinched up and they started taking lumps out of each other with elbows and knees. And I thought that was great. I'm always saying in the women's divisions, nobody hits very hard. You know, it was the game-breaking, goat-making glitch that Amanda Nunes had manpower. It was just unfair that she could actually hurt people and no one else could hurt her or each other. But using elbows is a great shout because they are a lot easier to get some force into because they're just because there's less moving parts. It's just your waist and shoulders whirling and then your elbows sticking out. The more joints you add to strikes, the more they become technical and you have to actually learn how to do them to build power. And knees are great anyway. Because it's a big, well, with both the elbow and the knee, it's a big unpadded shard of bone. You've got a great chance of cutting them open. And wouldn't you know it, Macy Chasson gets on top in the second round and opens up a cut on Mayra Bueno Silva, which was pretty ghastly. I say ghastly, you know, I don't care, but people at home do. That was the reason boxing gloves were brought in the first place. Oh, but they're bleeding. But the rule is, of course, if it's over the eye and it's going into the eye, if it's bleeding into the eye, you are deemed unsafe to continue. So the doctor's job is to look at it and go, well, it is bleeding into the eye. And this doctor came out and he was like, oh, it's pretty deep. And Chris Toglioni goes, yeah, but what do I do? And he says, oh, it's very deep. And good for Chris Toglioni because he actually did some good reffing here. Normally he's just standing around getting in the way. But he made this doctor say, you should stop the fight. He asked him like 5 times, what's your opinion? What's your opinion? Stop telling me it's a deep cut. What's your opinion? And then the moment the guy says like, it's just going to bleed in her eye or whatever, Chris Toglioni says, yep, that's the fight off. Because that's the rule. But this doctor took the job as a ringside doctor, presumably because tickets were $3,000. And he's like, I'm going to see Conor McGregor. Maybe I'll smell him. And he clearly didn't want to be blamed for stopping this fight. Imagine how bad this guy would have been in the McGregor-Chandler fight if there was a cut in that. He'd have been in there going, I can't see a cut. Mr. Magooing it. Joe Pyfer versus Marc-Andre Barriel was exactly what you expected. Joe Pyfer walked him to the fence, hit him with some overhands, knocked him down, scored the knockout, rather, left him on his face. Immediately after the fight, he starts trying to make beef with Paul Craig, which is desperate. It's like, I've written a list of fighters who aren't actually dangerous at all on the feet, who can't slip a punch and can't take a punch. And I'm going to invent reasons why we have beef, and then the UFC will match me up against it. I mean, you could just ask the UFC. He's their boy. They'll match him up against him. But honestly, a pathetic call-out. for a world-class fighter. Peyton Talbot stole the show. I was writing an article on Peyton Talbot last week, or started last week, thinking that we had a break before UFC 303, and so I didn't get it done in time. Talked about him at length on the Boycast and the things I liked about him. Came out, didn't even need it. Threw a nice jab, stayed on top of his feet. We've been talking about that double movement, moved both feet on the jab and both feet on the right hand. He did that. He was right on top of Gamori as Gamori threw a kick. Sparked him, and the highlight of the fight was Daniel Cormier was in the middle of saying, these new guys, I just watched their fight on the day. And he called it a process. My process of commentating is to do no research. Is to do less than the bare minimum. Then let's talk about the Jackson Wink guys. There's a turd sandwich in the middle of this card. Gillian Robertson versus Michelle Waterson Gomez and Andre Arlovski versus Martin Poudet. Not worth talking about those two fights. Cub Swanson versus Andre Fili was pretty good. Fili, always tricky, just lacks the pop. I wonder if being Team Alpha Male is holding him back, because it has made him an interesting striker against wrestlers. He has really good wrestling for a guy who's mainly a striker. But everyone at that gym has like natural pop, and he doesn't really. He could do with being, I mean, maybe go to Whitman or someone who can teach him to get a bit more weight on his punches. Because he's always doing clever things, and then he either loses a split decision or wins a split decision or gets knocked out when he meets someone with big power. This was a real like pick 'em, because Cub Swanson was moving forward the whole time, landed a couple of big shots, but wasn't really landing a whole lot. Andre Fili was pitter-patting him up, but moving backwards the whole time, getting countered. Neither guy really did anything amazing. Andre Fili was hitting nice reactive doubles as Swanson was coming forward, and Swanson was doing great get-ups. Swanson has always been really good at putting in one butterfly hook, sometimes on the wrong side, and getting up from there. Fili got the win. I mean, Cub Swanson's here as like a legacy act. He's a legend. He can do whatever he wants. But the feeling on this card was it was supposed to be like the end of an era for Jackson Wink. Michelle Waterson Gomez did retire. I'm going to say thanks, Michelle Waterson. It was cool that you were an atomweight, but because the UFC wouldn't bring in an atomweight class, you fought up like 10 pounds your whole career against really big girls. But I'm not going to do the cowardly thing of pretending that she was a really fun fighter that we all loved to watch now that she's retired. She wasn't. She had one of the least entertaining styles ever. But when she grappled, it was really fun. She had a great fight with Jessica Penne back in Invicta. I know I'm praising an Invicta fight, crazy. She had a great fight with Courtney Casey with loads of grappling in. It was just when she was standing on the other side of the cage throwing front kicks at air that she wasn't very entertaining, which was most of the fight, to be honest. But yeah, they were hoping that Andre Arlovski was going to retire. There was so much buzz about Andre Arlovski retiring. Lots of reporters were being like, oh, it could be Andre Arlovski's last dance. Afterwards, Dana White said it was Andre Arlovski's last fight. Andre Arlovski hasn't said a word about it, because Andre Arlovski has the best con going. It came out a while ago. He fought somewhere with the purses, where they still release purses. He gets hundreds of thousands of dollars a fight, win or lose. I believe he's like over him. He managed to negotiate a lower win bonus so that like 3/4 of his money is in show. But he also makes like hundreds of thousands of dollars a fight. Every time he turns, and he's found this way of fighting that is really boring and ultra conservative and tedious, but he can compete, or at least, stop a fight from happening against basically every heavyweight in the world who isn't really, really good. So he could do this until he's like 50. Since he came back to the UFC, he's had 25 fights, and aside from like the Travis Brown one and the ones where he's got knocked out, they've all been kind of this tedious, slow-paced bollocks. But he makes a fortune doing it. He's won the game. No, there are fighters who are stars for the UFC. Alex Pereira is probably not going to make as much in the long term as Andre Arlovski did in the last 20 fights of his UFC career that no one can remember a single highlight from. So Dana White said it's his last fight, but Andre Arlovski, I mean, he lost this one, so they could cut him. But the UFC seems terrified of Arlovski getting away to Bellator or whatever dog shit promotion Scott Coker starts up next. But really, they should have just retired Jackson Wink, because we said it on the Boycast, but I don't know, is there anyone good coming through there? Their top guys are old guys. It's Michelle Waterson, it's Andre Arlovski, it's Cub Swanson. The best that they had recently, like new fighters, was Timur Valiev, and while he was cut from the UFC far too early, he ain't a world beater. But these guys used to be the force in MMA, and now they're just some guys. But there was a time when any fighter on a couple of fight losing streak. The advice would be go to Jackson Wink, learn to circle and low kick and throw the odd oblique kick. It's just, that was the time. But now they're just not the same force they were. So promising young up-and-comers, John Silva, actually I don't know if he's young, he looks old as hell. John Silva is, he's only 27. John Silva had a great performance against Charles Jourdain. Really seemed to spook him, just backed him up and feinted at him, and Charles Jourdain would throw the southpaw left high kick, miss, try and enter on a takedown afterwards as he thought Silva was coming back in, and Silva wouldn't be coming back in. Just had him very flustered. The knockout shot was fantastic. Limp legging out of a single, framing off the face and hitting the Jack Johnson uppercut with the vertical fist. Love it. Just in a really short space. Guy clearly hits like a ton of bricks and he's a good technician too. Out of the Fighting Nerds, who I do like as a camp, they got Caio Borralho down there. They got Mauricio Ruffi. And ahead of ADCC last time, they had Melky Galvao and all his superstars come down and train with them too, and Damien Meyer. Place has good jits, but they're all winning fights standing. Ray Saruya versus Carlos Hernandez. Great fight. I thought Hernandez gave a great account of himself because Saruya on the Road to Contender Series. Sorry, Road to Contender Series? Oh, God, that'd be grim, wouldn't it? You have to win a tournament to get on the Contender Series. Road to the UFC, he looked really strong. Pinch headlock stuff, great groundwork. He was like twistering people in a way where he got a body triangle from the back and then he was putting them under his armpit. Not really a twister, but a legitimate spine crank. Just tries whatever. And in this one, he accidentally, he hit a beautiful belly-to-belly suplex, and then later he tried the same suplex, and he dropped Carlos Hernandez into almost mount, and he just fought out of it. Like, he just keeps working. Really, you can see his mind working in scrambles, but in a way where he's still just going with it and working fast and automatically. And Carlos Hernandez actually gave a great account of himself. He was doing things like a funk roll to get up, and Ray Saruya was trying to roll off that. Just a high-level scrambling match, this. Vinicius Oliveira versus Ricky Simón opened the night, and kind of felt like Ricky Simón is washed. He really looked bad in this one. But Vinicius Oliveira, for how he was acting, was definitely not looking as good as he thought he did. He's got his hands real low, he's throwing ones and twos, landing long straight punches, but he's also getting cracked by like 1 in every 3 big swings that Ricky Simón attempts while looking at the floor. Oliveira's defensive reactions just did not seem anywhere near as good as they should be to fight that close with your hands low. But Ricky Simón checked a low kick and bust Oliveira's leg up. And then people get to low kicking him, and Ricky Simón's like, no, I'm going to start setting up my jab again. Ricky Simón, he had a really good couple of years back, in fact, and it was based off mixing his boxing with his level changes and being sort of like Merab, to be honest. They had a fight a while back, which was great, but just putting a great pace on people and boxing up and down. And sometimes when you go down, you grab their hips, and it works really well for him. But if you can't get the boxing established, he just looks very lackluster. And that's what he did here. But in the last round, Vinicius Oliveira threw a tactical Rabona, which is the stupidest kick. I talk about it all the time. It's from football or soccer, but it's where you pass your back foot across your front foot and kick out in front of you. So it's a showy-offy technique in football. In MMA, it does nothing because you can't hit someone's leg hard doing it. You just tap their ankle. But he managed to come back and then threw an uppercut and a 1-2 and a high kick, and he landed all of them. It was great. Up there with Yair Rodriguez threw a spinning elbow by doing a Rabona and then spinning back the other way. 2 practical applications of the Rabona now. We're getting there. Someone tell Ricardo Ramos. So that was the night of fights. Very sad that people who wanted to see Conor McGregor didn't get to see him. Very funny that Michael Chandler continues to waste his life on this fight that nobody even cares that Michael Chandler's in it, mate. If he dropped out on the day of the fight, the buy rate would not change. People would watch Conor McGregor versus the heavy bag as much as they'd watched him versus Michael Chandler. But like I said, I don't need it. Conor McGregor's not been serious about fighting for 8 years. I think he periodically convinces himself he's serious about fighting. But, it's the difference between him and Dustin Poirier. One was arguably more talented, disappeared for a while, hasn't been anywhere as good anytime he's come back. The other, less talented, but was here and actually became one of the greatest lightweights ever, probably. So I'm going to be back to talk about whatever's going on at the weekend. If there's nothing going on at the weekend, I don't know, talk about my experience on the Elden Ring DLC on the Boycast, which you can get by signing up to the Patreon. You also get some other cool articles in the vein of that Alex Pereira one. And you also get my eternal gratitude. If you want to send an email to the podcast to be answered on air, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Thinking back on all the times that Michelle Waterson accidentally landed a kick. Bless.